Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about how to analyse music harmony. There are various different ways in which we can do this, but one of the methods is the Roman numeral analysis method, where we work out which key we're in, and then we work out what are the chords for that key. So this piece of music we're looking at, which by the way is a movement from a collection by the composer Schumann, number 13, translates as The Poet Speaks, and it comes from Schumann's opus 15, Scenes from Childhood. But we've got one sharp in the key signature there, so we're in the key of G major. We could be in the key of E minor, but actually we're in the key of G major. So if that's the case, let's just think about what the chords are in the key of G major for a moment, because that will just help us in this task. So there's the F sharp for G major, and the thing to do is to work out the scale for G major: G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. Well, obviously G at the top, I could complete the scale, but it's the same as the first note G. All we do then is put the third and the fifth above each of these notes. And you notice when you do this, you end up with 3 successive spaces or 3 successive lines. So it's a good way of just double checking you've got the right notes. So we've got G, B, D, based on the first note of G major scale, A, C, E, based on the second note, B, D, F sharp, remember from the key signature, based on the third note, and so on. So, of course, I can call this G, and I can call this A minor, and I can call this B minor, and I can call this C, and I can call this D, and I can call this E minor, and I can call this F sharp diminished, because that's how it works out. So G, A minor, B minor, C major, D major, E minor, F sharp diminished. Those are all the chords of G major. Or we can use Roman numeral analysis and say that's chord 1 based on the first note of the scale, chord 2 based on the second note of the scale, chord 3 based on the third note, and so on. Chord 4, chord 5, chord 6, and finally chord 7. Now, it's always possible that those basic chords might be extended. In other words, we're building in thirds. We've got G, B, and D, what we call a root, a third, and a fifth. So the root is G in this case, B is a third above it, 3 notes above the G, D is a fifth above it, 5 notes above the G. Say I wanted to extend that chord by putting an extra note on the top, I would keep building the chord in thirds. So for example, if I want to put an F sharp on the top of that first chord, that would be chord 1, 7. It will be a tonic 7th chord, or a G major 7 chord. Do you see how that works? So all you've got to do is add another third above the top note to make it a 7th chord, add another third to make it a 9th chord, and so on. And we'll discover in this piece of music, we've got some of those extended chords. And we've also got some other interesting chords that we'll have a look at along the way. So the great thing about this piece is it's quite short, and there are bits in the middle where we've just got a kind of bit of melodic decoration going on, so we don't have to worry too much about what's going on there. And we've got quite a bit of repetition, because when you come to this second half of the piece, you find actually we're kind of reworking the first bit of it as well. So there are not too many chords to look at to get through the piece. So let's have a look and see if we can do some kind of analysis of the chords of this piece. Why do we want to do that? Well, it's quite helpful sometimes to know what the chords are in a particular piece of music, and it helps you to think, that's where it's changing key, or that's where we've got one of these extended chords, or we've got an unusual chord that doesn't quite belong to this basic system that we've just been through. And that might help us interpret the piece by drawing attention to those chords that are changing key, or chords that are a little bit unusual, adding a bit of colour to things. Or it may be that, we're a composer wanting to write a piece of music and we're just thinking, well, I'm never quite sure what to do about chords. I always get stuck with the same chords. How can I get kind of inspiration from a great composer like Schumann? So even if I don't want to write in the same style as Schumann, I can kind of work out how to use these chords. Now, just before we get going with analysing the chords, let me just play you a little bit of The Poet Speaks, and then you can hear what this piece is about. And so on. That's just the flavour of what this is. Quite a kind of reflective piece, isn't it? So let's now see if we can work out the chords. One thing that's good about this piece from the point of view of this exercise is that it uses what we call block chords much of the time. It's literally just chord, chord, chord. Sometimes it starts to embellish. So when we get later on, you think, there's lots of extra little notes going on, quavers or eighth notes going on there. And sometimes that makes it slightly difficult to see the chords. In this case, it's not too bad, but we can see block chords and we can see these kind of broken chords later. So it's a chance to sort of engage with both things. Okay, well, often a piece of music starts on chord 1. Because, we need to make sure that the audience knows we're in G major, and that's an obvious place to start. Sometimes it starts on something else, and in this case, it does. So the first thing is try and work out what the notes are in the chord. Even though you've got 3 notes in a triad, well, you could double one of those notes and make it a 4-note chord. You could have 2 notes doubled and make it a 5-note chord. You get the idea. Well, when we look at this chord, we see there are actually 4 notes in it, but there are 4 different notes in it. So could it be that we've got one of these triads, but we've done one of these extensions that we were talking about a moment ago? Well, let's see if we can work out what's going on here. Well, we've got a D, then we've got an F sharp, then we've got an A, then we've got C. So if I kind of organise that into a basic chord, we've got D, F sharp, A, C. Well, does that look like anything we've got written here? Well, it does look a bit like this, doesn't it? Because this is D, F sharp, A, but we've got C stuck on the top of it. So it's looking like we've added a 7th to chord 5. So then we can say that this is chord 5 because it's got D, F sharp and A in it, but it's also got that 7th, so we'll call it 5-7. And then there's one other thing we need to say. Is it in what we call a root position, or is it in an inversion? What do we mean by that? Well, if I was to take this chord 5, if D is the lowest sounding note, so it's the bottom note of the chord, then I can say it's chord 5 or chord 5-7 in root position. If it's the same chord but F sharp is at the bottom, then I say it's in first inversion. So if the third of the chord is at the bottom, it's using those D, F sharp, A notes, or D, F sharp, A, C notes in this case. But F sharp is at the bottom. The third of the chord is at the bottom, so it's in first inversion. If it's the same chord but A is at the bottom, we say it's in second inversion. And with this added C that we're talking about here, if C was at the bottom, it would be in its third inversion. Now, when we look at this, we do find, in fact, that C is at the bottom. So it's chord 5-7 because it's using the notes of chord 5. It's 5-7 because we've got that C on the top of it. But then, because that C is the bottom of the chord, well, it's in its last inversion, its third inversion. If it's in root position, you call it A. If it's in first inversion, you call it B. Second inversion, you call it C. Third inversion, you call it D. Now, if you've learnt this on a kind of US system, you might have come across root position as a 5-3 chord, first inversion as a 6 chord, second inversion as a 6-4 chord, and the third inversion as a 7-5-3 chord. It's another way of doing things. But 5-7-D is telling us it's chord 5 with a 7th added, that's C, and the C is in fact the bottom note, so it's in its third inversion. It's a 5-7-D. Okay, let's continue our musical chord detective work. So that's the first chord. So that's the chord we were talking about there. When we move on to the second chord, well, okay, what are these notes? Well, we've got B in the bass, we've got G, we've got D, then we've got G again. So there are 4 notes, but in fact there are only 3 different notes because we've got G twice. So can we organise that into a basic triad? We've got B and G and D. Can we get that into a basic triad? Well, we soon realise we're looking at chord 1, the G-B-D chord. So when we label this, we're going to say the notes are G, B, D, so that's chord 1. So the first thing we do, label it chord 1. And then we can say which of those notes is in the bass, because if the G's in the bass, then it's in root position, it's an A chord. And if it's an A chord, you don't write anything, you just assume it's A if you see nothing. If the B's in the bass, then it's in first inversion, so it's 1B. If D's in the bass, it's in second inversion and it's 1C. Well, B is in the bass, isn't it? This one here. So it's in first inversion, so it's 1B. Great. When we look at the third chord, well, interesting, when you think about these notes, they're the same notes that we had in the first chord. So it's looking like another one of these 5-7s again, isn't it? It's D, F sharp, A, and it's got C as well. We've got D, F sharp, A, C. So it must be another one of these 5-7s. So let's mark that in. But this time it's not a 5-7-D because C is not in the bass, A is in the bass. So A is this note, isn't it? Which means it's the 5th in the bass, so it's in second inversion. So this is a 5-7-C chord. Aha! Okay, moving on. When we come to this chord, we think, hello, we've seen this one before. We saw it here. So even though the notes are slightly differently organised, aren't they? Because the top note there was G, the top note here is B. It's still G, B at the top and the bottom, D. So it's still chord 1, isn't it? It hasn't got any extra notes in it. There's no 7ths or anything. So it's still a chord 1, and it's still a chord 1B because whatever has been reorganised higher up the chord, we've still got the third of the chord in the bass. So it's chord 1, first inversion. Hope you're getting the idea of this. Okay, brilliant. Let's move on. Here's the next chord, and let's see if we can work out what these notes are. We've got a C, we've got a G, we've got an E. So it's tempting to think, oh yeah, I think I can see that this is a C, E, G chord, but then there's an A in it as well. So is it really a C, E, G chord? Because if you put A above it, well, that's not going up in thirds, is it? Because that's only a second above that G. However, if you think the basic chord might be this, A, C, E, which explains 3 of the notes in that chord, but we've extended it by putting a G on the top. So you see it's another third, isn't it? That makes more sense, doesn't it? So it's not really a chord 4 with a sort of note that doesn't sit a third above the highest note. It's a chord 2 because that G does sit a third above the highest note. Aha! So in other words, it's a 2, 7. So let's commit to that. It's chord 2, get the notes first, then say, was there anything extra going on? Yes, there's a 7th. And then come back and ask yourself about the inversion. Well, what's in the bass? C is in the bass. That's the third of the chord. So it must be in first inversion. So call it 2-7B. Hopefully you're getting the hang of this now, which is cool. Okay, now bear with me if I miss out the next chord for a moment. We're going to come back to it, don't worry. Let's look at this chord next. Well, what can we see here? We've got D, we've got G, we've got D again, we've got B. So we've got 3 different notes. Which 3 notes are they? Which triad do they relate to? Well, you can see it's our old friend chord 1 again, isn't it? So this is definitely a chord 1, but what's in the bass? It's D. So the 5th of the chord is in the bass. So it's in second inversion. So what does that mean? It's chord 1, second inversion, 1C. Brilliant. Now, sometimes notes hang around. You see this note is hanging around for the rest of the bar. This note is hanging around for the rest of the bar. So when we look at these notes, we've got to think about, well, there's that note, there's that one, there's this one, and there's this one. So now we've got to say, what are all these notes? Well, we've got D, F sharp, D, A. So D, F sharp, A. That's looking like our old friend chord 5, isn't it? So this is moving from 1C to chord 5. And because D is in the bass, it's in root position. So it's a 5A chord. Because it's A, you don't need to write anything, just leave it as a 5. So that's what's going on there. Now, when we just go back in the light of that to this previous chord, you might think, well, what's all this about? Because we've got C sharp in it. Now, C sharp hasn't got anything to do with the key of G major. And we said that we're in the key of G major. So why is there a C sharp involved in this thing? That's a bit weird, isn't it? It must be sort of hinting at another key. So can we work out what's going on in this chord? Well, we've got C sharp in the bass. A third above that is E, and we've got one of those. A third above that is G, and we've got one of those. And then a third above that is B, and we've got one of those. So it's looking like one of these 7th chords, isn't it? But when we look at the lower 3 notes, C sharp, E, G, is that a chord? Well, it's not a chord in G major, but could it be a chord in another key? And if so, which key? Well, we've got F sharp in the key signature for G major. If we've got C sharp, maybe we've moved to D major because D major's got F sharp and C sharp. In which case, C sharp E G would be chord 7. And because we've got that B on the top of it, it's chord 7, 7 in the key of D major. Oh, so it's a slightly more complicated one, isn't it? So this one is 7, 7 in the key of D. Okay, see how we got to that one? C sharp E G is chord 7. B is that extra third on the top, making it a 7, 7. And it's in the key of D major, 1 key away from G major. Now, what on earth is that doing there? Well, Schumann's just trying to make it a bit more colourful. Doesn't want it to be too boring, so he gives a hint of another key. And if you see what's going on, we've got this chord 7, 7 in the key of D, and we end up with a D chord over here, because this is chord 5 in G, but it's also chord 1 in the key of D, D, F sharp, A. So he's kind of hinting at D major back here, and kind of following it with a D major chord with this other chord stuck in between, just to give us a little bit of colour. So that's what he's doing there. So this is the first phrase now done. We've got 5, 7, D, 1B, 5, 7, C, then 1B, then 2, 7, B. These little notes are just a little ornament called a turn. Then we've got this color chord. You can hear this C sharp in the bass. It's a bit unusual. And that's our 7/7 in D. Then we're coming back to G, but we're going 1 C and to 5. And you hear that D major chord. So, okay, we're back in G major. And then Schumann says, oh, I think we'll go to another key. So let me tell you for nothing that he's spending his time in these next few bars going to the key of A minor. Now, how do I know it's A minor? Well, in A minor, the key signature is nothing. It's related to C major. So you notice he's got F naturals. You know, there's an F natural there, there's an F natural there, there's an F natural there. So what's that doing? It's cancelling the F sharp in the key signature. When you're in a minor key, you quite often raise the 7th note. So if I'm in A minor, the 7th note is G. If we raise it, it becomes G sharp. So what do we notice? We've got all these F naturals, but we've got G sharp, G sharp, G sharp, G sharp. And that's how we know that everything from here to the end of that line is actually in the key of A minor. So it's moved to another key. It's modulated. So if we want to get our chord straight for A minor, well, then we've got to start thinking, well, what are the chords for A minor? So you see this exercise that we've done here in G major. Well, can we do that again for A minor? And then we can see what some of these chords are. Just bear with me while I do this little bit of magic and get rid of all the chords for G major. Boom. How about that? Amazing. Right, let's now start our exercise again in the key of A minor. So we'll get a stave up, and then we'll have a treble clef, and we'll have a scale of A minor. Okay, so A, B, C, D, E, F, G sharp, remember, A. Why G sharp? Because in a harmonic minor scale, we raise the 7th note of the scale. A minor's got nothing in the key signature. The 7th note is G. Raise it by a semitone, so it's G sharp. Why the harmonic minor? Because we're looking at harmony. So harmony, harmonic minor. Do the triads again. So A, C, E, B, D, F, C, E, G sharp. Remember, because we've got G sharp on that 7th note, it's G sharp everywhere else. D, F, A, E, G sharp, B, F, A, C, G sharp, B, D, and then of course we're back to chord 1 again. Label it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and of course this is not 8, we're back to chord 1 again, aren't we? Now you could say that this one is A minor, B diminished, C augmented, D minor, E major, F major, G sharp diminished. That's a perfectly reasonable way of talking about it as well. The advantage of the Roman numerals is they show you which chords are being used inside a particular key. Now then, now we know we're going to A minor, can we work out what's going on here? We've got a D, a B, an F natural and a G sharp. So in fact, we've got 4 different notes. Could it be that we've got one of these 7th chords again? There are only 3 notes in a triad in a chord, but if we've got 4, it might be a 7th. Let's see if we can work out these notes. Well, it's looking a bit like chord 7, isn't it? Because we've got G sharp, B, D, and then we've got F as well. So it's looking like a 7, 7. Which is also known as a diminished 7th chord. If you've got minor thirds between each interval, so a minor third from G sharp to B, a minor third from B to D, a minor third from D to F, it's a diminished 7th. So we're in the key of A minor, and this is a diminished 7th. Now you could call it a 7/7 chord, that's absolutely fine. It's just that it is also a diminished seventh. So just something to bear in mind in the description of it. In terms of which inversion, well, we've got D in the bass. So look, that's that note there, isn't it? So it's second inversion. So it's a diminished seventh in second inversion. So it's a C, isn't it? When we look at the next chord, we've got C, A, E, A. So A comes twice, A, C, E. Aha, that's looking like a chord 1, isn't it? So this is chord 1 in A minor. C is in the bass, so that's the middle note, so it's in first inversion. So it's chord 1B. So that's what's going on there. When you come to the next chord, you might notice that this is a bit of a familiar friend because it's the same notes as this. Even though they've all been sort of differently reorganized, you've got this G sharp, B, D with the F again. So it's this chord 7, isn't it, with the 7th on it. So it's another one of these diminished 7th chords. And this time, what's the inversion? Well, we've got a B, haven't we? So it's the 3rd of the chord this time. So this one is in first inversion. It's a diminished 7th, B. All right? And then the next chord, well, it's sort of an interesting one because we've only got 3 notes this time. We've got a C, we've got an E, and we've got a C. So in fact, we've only got 2 different notes, a C and an E. So it could be something to do with chord 3 because that's got a C and an E in it. Or it could be something to do with chord 1 because that's got a C and an E. How do we know? Bit difficult to tell sometimes. But really it sort of makes sense. It's the last note of this phrase that maybe we're coming back to chord 1 rather than going to chord 3. So let's call it chord 1 and then say, well, which note's in the bass? The root, the 3rd or the 5th? The 3rd's in the bass, so it's in first inversion. It's 1B. Okay, now just to sort of slightly speed up the process, I'll tell you that the next chord is chord 2. It's the B, D, F chord, and it's in first inversion. So this is a 2B. Then the next chord, E, G sharp, B, looking like a chord 5, isn't it? And it's in root position because E's in the bass. That chord then repeats, so that's nice because it's 5 again. And then at the end of this, we come to an A, C, E chord. So it's chord 1. So you see what's going on in that second phrase. So now looking at this second phrase, we've got this diminished 7th to 1B, diminished 7th, 1B, and after the rest, we've got 2B, and then 5, 5, 1. And so it goes on. We could do the rest of the piece, but I think you've got the idea, haven't you, as to how this works. So this is how to look at a piece of music and do some chord analysis to really sort of think, what was the composer thinking? What was the composer doing? What's happening with these keys? Getting the idea of starting in G major and then modulating to A minor and then working out where he goes from there. As a means of understanding the piece, thinking, oh, those diminished 7th chords, if I'm playing this piece, I might want to paint those because they're a bit colourful, aren't they? So we might want to make something of these diminished 7ths. We might want to make something of the chords like this as well, where we had that little bit of colour into D major. So apart from maybe emphasising the melody at the top, you're going to draw out these chords. If you're writing music, well, here's a few ideas from Schumann as to how you use the basic chords, how you vary the inversions, how you add 7ths, how you add a bit of colour using things like diminished 7th chords. And we've seen all of that in the opening bars of this one movement of Schumann's Scenes from Childhood. So I hope that's helpful in terms of doing this chord analysis. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, you might want to go to our website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. There you can find lots of details of our courses simply by clicking on courses. And there you'll find courses in harmony, lots more on harmonic analysis, but other things as well, aural, orchestration, lots of things that are going to empower you as a musician. So have a look at the courses. Then when you go back to the home page, click on Maestros and you'll find out all about our international community of musicians. 3 levels, nothing to do with ability, but just kind of levels of access and engagement. Level 1 is a kind of fun membership that enables you just to engage with us a bit more fully and comes with fun things like emojis and so on. Level 2 comes with more perks, including a monthly live stream where you can join me for an hour every month and I'll give you an hour solid teaching on this kind of thing in much more detail, and you can ask questions in a live chat, interact with the other people in the group, and that's a wonderful place to be. If you want to go yet a step further, you can take out a level 3 membership, which gives you all the perks of level 1 and level 2, but this time you can submit your own work. So if you want to submit some chord analysis, I'll give you one-to-one feedback on it. If you want to submit a composition or an arrangement or a recording of yourself playing, you can do that and I'll give you individual feedback. We'll share it in the group, the live chat runs, so lots of questions and comments will come in, lots of supportive stuff from other people, and we all learn from each other. And you'll just discover that you're part of a group of musicians from all over the world, all on the same kind of journey or a different version of the same kind of journey. So it's a lovely group to get to know other musicians and for us to learn from each other. So have a look on Maestros and see what's there for you. www.mmcourses.co.uk